You probably think working the graveyard shift at a Walmart in the middle of Arizona sounds boring. Just stocking shelves, scanning the occasional late-night customer, and trying not to fall asleep under those buzzing fluorescent lights. But if you think that, you've never stepped inside our store after midnight, because this place isn't normal, it has rules. Not the kind corporate sends down in emails, but handwritten ones, old and yellowed, shoved into the hands of every new night worker with a look that says, "Don't laugh, don't question, just follow them if you want to live through your shift." And the first time I saw that list, I thought it was a joke, but I don't laugh about it anymore. My name's Daniel, I'm 24, and I didn't come to this job because I wanted to. I came here because I had no other choice. I lost my last job at a garage in Tucson after my boss found me drinking on the clock. Long story short, I screwed up. Bills piled high, rent due, and the only place hiring in this dusty nowhere town was the Walmart on the highway. So I signed up for nights thinking I'd have the store to myself. Maybe a few drunks buying beer, easy money. But what I walked into was something I couldn't have imagined, even in my worst dreams. My first night, Mr. Alvarez, the night manager, a guy in his late 50s with skin weathered from too many years in the desert sun, handed me that crumpled paper with a serious look in his eyes, like a priest passing down scripture, and he said, "Read them, memorize them, and never break them." His voice steady, no trace of humor, and then he walked away before I could ask questions, leaving me standing under the humming lights with a list of rules that didn't make any sense. The first one said, after 2:30 a.m., if you see a customer without a shadow, don't approach, don't speak, and don't turn your back until they're gone. The second, never let aisle 9 go empty, always keep something on the shelf. The third, if the overhead speaker starts playing children's music, drop what you're doing and hide behind the registers until it stops. There were more, scratched out and rewritten, some with stains on the edges like coffee or maybe blood, I couldn't tell. But at that moment I figured it was hazing, some weird tradition to scare the new guy. The night started quiet enough, me pushing a cart of boxes down long empty aisles, filling shelves while the AC rattled above. But around 2:30 the automatic doors slid open, and in came a woman, gray hair tucked into a bun, walking slow, holding a loaf of bread. Nothing weird about that until I noticed it. The light shining above her and nothing on the floor beneath. No shadow, just bare linoleum. And my stomach tightened as I remembered the rule. Don't approach, don't speak, don't turn your back. But curiosity got the better of me and I almost said, "Ma'am, can I help you?" When Alvarez's hand clamped hard on my shoulder, pulling me back behind a display of chips. His whisper sharp against my ear, "Don't say a word. Rookie." And I froze as the woman turned her head like she heard us anyway. And in the silence of that cavernous store, I heard her whisper, soft but clear, "Danny," using my mother's voice. The exact voice I hadn't heard since her funeral 2 years ago. My chest went tight, my mouth dry. I wanted to run to her to ask how, but Alvarez's grip held me steady until the woman shuffled down the aisle and vanished through the back wall like smoke. And the second she was gone, Alvarez let me go, his face pale under the flickering lights. And he said, "You almost broke the first rule. You wouldn't have survived it." And the seriousness in his eyes made me realize none of this was a prank. The rest of that night blurred into a fog of fear. Every sound too loud, every shadow too long. Me trying to keep my hands from shaking as I stocked shelves while watching the clock crawl toward dawn. Alvarez never far, his gaze heavy on me like he was making sure I didn't step out of line again. And when the sun finally bled through the glass doors, I staggered out of the store feeling like I had survived a war I hadn't signed up for. I told myself maybe it was exhaustion, maybe I hallucinated, maybe Alvarez staged something to scare me into discipline. But deep down I knew what I saw was real. And when I pulled that rule sheet out of my pocket the next morning and read it again, I realized one terrifying truth. This job wasn't about stocking shelves or helping customers. It was about surviving the night. And if I wanted to make it through another shift, I had to follow every single rule, no matter how insane they sounded. The morning after that first shift, I told myself I wouldn't go back. I sat on the edge of my crappy twin mattress in my one-bedroom apartment, staring at that wrinkled list of rules until the words blurred, my hands shaking from the memory of the woman with no shadow and the sound of my mother's voice. Part of me screamed to quit, to pack up and head back to Tucson, maybe crash on a friend's couch. But the truth was I had nowhere to go. Rent was due, my car payment was hanging over my head, and the garage job I lost was never coming back. So when the clock hit 10:30 that night, I found myself driving the same desert highway back toward that Walmart, glowing like a lonely lantern in the middle of an endless stretch of asphalt, the neon sign buzzing faintly above the doors. Alvarez was waiting near the registers when I walked in, sipping coffee from a cracked thermos, his eyes scanning me like he already knew I had thought about running. And without saying a word, he just tapped the rule sheet folded in my shirt pocket and walked away. And somehow that gesture alone reminded me that there was no escaping this. Not if I wanted to live. The first few hours passed quiet. Too quiet. The kind that makes every creak in the ceiling sound like footsteps. Every hum of the refrigeration units feel like a growl. And I forced myself to keep busy, stocking soup cans, lining up cereal boxes, folding cheap t-shirts in aisle 12. But my mind kept replaying the woman's whisper and how close I had come to answering her. And I wondered what would have happened if Alvarez hadn't stopped me. The thought stuck like a splinter under my skin. Around 2 a.m., a young kid named Tony showed up, another night worker I hadn't met before. Skinny, with a mop of curly hair and headphones dangling around his neck. He gave me a half smile and said, "First week? You'll get used to it." Like we were talking about boring customers and late paychecks instead of rules that meant life or death. And I tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. By 2:30, I was in aisle 9 restocking instant ramen. When I noticed the shelves were nearly bare, just a couple of cups left. And that rule flashed in my mind. Never let aisle 9 go empty, always keep something on the shelf. At first I shrugged, thinking it was corporate paranoia about presentation. But then I remembered Alvarez's tone when he warned me not to break the first rule. So I hurried to the back to grab more boxes. But when I returned, I froze, because Tony was standing there staring at the empty shelf. His hands stuffed in his hoodie pocket, his eyes glazed like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. And before I could speak, he started whispering under his breath, words I didn't recognize, low and guttural like static, and I dropped the box, cans clattering across the floor, snapping him out of whatever trance he was in. He blinked at me, confused, and muttered, "You heard it too, right?" But I hadn't heard anything, only the pounding of my own heart. I quickly threw the ramen on the shelves just to get something there. And the second I did, the overhead lights flickered, once, twice, and then the entire store went dark. Pitch black except for the faint glow of emergency exit signs. My chest tightened as I remembered the third rule about children's music. But instead of a song, I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. The shuffle of dozens of tiny footsteps echoing down the aisles, like barefoot kids running. But there were no kids, just shadows darting between racks of clothes. Too fast, too many, and Tony grabbed my arm, whispering, "Don't let them see you," before yanking me behind a pallet of soda. Both of us crouched low as the footsteps grew louder, closer, circling us, and then came the laughter, high-pitched, overlapping, like a broken recording of children at recess. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for the lights to come back. But when they flickered on again, the store was empty, silent like nothing had happened, but the ramen cups I had just stocked were gone. The shelves stripped bare as if invisible hands had taken every single one. Alvarez appeared seconds later, face tight, eyes darting between me and Tony, and he hissed, "What happened? Who let aisle 9 go empty?" And before I could speak, Tony muttered, "I thought it didn't matter." And Alvarez grabbed him by the hoodie, slamming him against the shelf so hard cans rattled down, his voice low and furious. "It always matters, you never leave it empty. Do you want them to get out?" And Tony went pale, stammering apologies. Alvarez finally let him go, breathing hard, and then he turned to me, his gaze heavy. "This is your second warning, rookie. If you can't follow the rules, you won't last the week." And in that moment, I realized the rules weren't just about keeping us safe. They were about keeping something else trapped, something that wanted out. And the thought that we weren't protecting ourselves but the world outside made my stomach twist. The rest of the night blurred into tension. Alvarez stalking the aisles like a guard dog. Tony keeping his headphones clamped on tight like music could block out whatever whispers had gotten into his head. And me gripping that crumpled rule sheet until my fingers ached, staring at the words like they could save me. By dawn, I stumbled out into the desert air again. The sun rising pink over the mountains, but instead of relief, all I felt was dread. Because now I knew this wasn't just a job, it was a prison, and we were the guards. And the only thing standing between those shadows in the aisles and the rest of Arizona were a handful of rules scrawled on paper that was already starting to tear at the edges. When you work nights in a Walmart, you get used to the silence. It's not like daytime with carts rattling and cashiers calling out prices. The graveyard shift is hours of humming fluorescent lights and the occasional beep of a scanner. So when the overhead speaker crackled to life around 3 in the morning, it sent a jolt straight down my spine. Tony froze next to me in the cleaning aisle, a broom halfway to the shelf, and Alvarez came striding out of the back like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. His eyes locked on the speaker above the registers as a soft melody floated out. It wasn't the usual corporate announcements or music. It was a lullaby, slow and sweet. The kind you'd sing to a baby, only the recording was warped, stretched like an old cassette, the voice too high, too distorted, and my hands went cold as I remembered Rule 3. If the speaker starts playing children's music, drop what you're doing and hide behind the registers until it stops. Alvarez didn't even need to say it, he just motioned sharply and the three of us crouched behind the front counter, hearts hammering in the silence between notes. The song dragged on, repeating the same line, "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." But behind it, I swear I heard something else. A low whispering layered under the lullaby, words too fast to catch, and Tony was shaking his head like he wanted to tear off his ears, his hands pressed hard against them, while Alvarez gripped my shoulder so tight it hurt, whispering, "Don't move, don't look." His eyes wide and unblinking. A shadow slid across the linoleum, stretching long like something tall was walking down the aisles. And even though the store was lit up, the air grew cold, cold enough for my breath to fog, and the shadow moved without sound, circling the registers, pausing like it was sniffing us out. And in that moment I realized the rules weren't just survival tips, they were a cage, a set of rituals meant to distract or appease whatever was in here with us. After what felt like forever, the lullaby cut off mid-word, silence slamming down so heavy my ears rang, and just like that the shadow was gone, the air warming again, the light steady, and Alvarez finally let out a breath, muttering, "That's the third time this month." His voice ragged like he hadn't slept in years. Tony muttered something about quitting, about not caring if rent was due, and Alvarez snapped at him, "You think you can just walk away? You think it doesn't follow?" And the look in his eyes told me quitting wasn't an option, that once you worked the night shift here, you were tied to the rules whether you wanted to be or not. When the sun rose and the store emptied of its horrors, Alvarez called me into the manager's office, the blinds drawn tight, and tossed a stack of old notebooks on the desk, the covers warped and stained. "You want to survive? Read these," he said, his voice flat. "They're journals from the ones who worked before us. Most didn't make it, but they wrote down what they saw, how the rules came to be, what happens if you break them." I flipped through the first one, pages covered in frantic handwriting, sketches of figures with no eyes, descriptions of nights when the rules failed, notes about aisle 9 and the shelves going bare, about the lullaby on the speakers, and in one entry the writer scribbled, "It's not just inside, the rules keep them from spreading, from leaving with the customers, from riding the carts out into the lot." The words scrawled over and over until the ink tore holes in the paper. My stomach turned, realizing this store wasn't cursed by accident. It was holding something back, something ancient maybe, or something summoned, and the thought that corporate might not even know, or worse, they did and kept it running anyway, made bile rise in my throat. Alvarez saw the look on my face and said, "Don't get curious, rookie. Curiosity gets you killed. Follow the rules, that's it." But curiosity doesn't just vanish, it gnaws. And that morning as I drove home under the blazing Arizona sun, I kept hearing that warped lullaby in my head, and the whispers beneath it, and I wondered if they had been saying my name. The next night I came in more prepared, rule sheet folded in my pocket, flashlight on my belt, and a pit in my gut that told me things were only getting worse. By midnight the store felt restless, the AC rattling harder, the lights buzzing louder, and when the doors slid open around 1 a.m., a man walked in wearing a Walmart vest. Only his name tag was blank, and I didn't recognize him. Tony whispered, "Who the hell is that? We don't have anyone else on shift." And I remembered a line from the journals I'd skimmed, "If you see a worker you don't recognize, don't let them speak first." My throat went dry as the man walked toward us, smiling too wide, his steps silent. Alvarez stepped between us and said, "Back to stocking, I'll handle him." But the fear in his voice betrayed him, and I realized then that the rules weren't just written to keep things out. They were written to keep us in line, to keep us from panicking, because panic meant mistakes, and mistakes meant feeding whatever hunted the aisles after midnight. The man in the Walmart vest stood at the end of the aisle, smiling with lips too pale. his name tag blank like no one had ever bothered to print it. And everything in me screamed to leave, to turn and bolt for the back, but Alvarez's hand shot up, palm flat, warning me to stay put, his voice low and tight. "Don't let him talk. Whatever you do." And for a second I thought Alvarez was going to walk right up and confront him. But then the stranger tilted his head, not like a person but like a puppet whose strings had been tugged too sharply, and that was when the lights flickered just once, but enough for me to notice that his shadow didn't match. His body facing one way, the shadow angled the other, and I remembered the first rule about shadows. Don't speak, don't approach, don't turn your back, but this wasn't a customer. This was someone pretending to be us. Someone pretending to belong. Tony muttered, "I'm not doing this, man," and started backing up, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, and in that moment the man's smile widened, like cracks spreading across porcelain, and his mouth opened but no sound came out. Just a rush of air that made the overhead sign sway as if a storm had blown through the store. Alvarez lunged forward, grabbing a mop handle from the cart and slamming it across the aisle between the stranger and us. The wood clattering loud enough to echo, and the man froze, head still cocked, before slowly backing away step by step until he reached the freezer section. And without opening the door, he simply melted into the glass, vanishing as though he'd stepped behind a curtain. Silence hung for a long beat before Tony snapped, his voice shaking. "No, screw this, I'm out. I'm not dying in this place for minimum wage." And he tore off his vest, throwing it on the floor, heading for the sliding doors. And I almost ran after him, but Alvarez barked, "Let him go," his tone rough like he knew something I didn't. We stood there in the buzzing lights, the store too quiet again, until I finally asked, "What happens if he quits?" Alvarez didn't answer, he just muttered, "Read the journals, rookie. Some people think leaving saves them, but the rules follow you, always." That morning after the sun came up, I couldn't shake the image of Tony walking out into the parking lot, how his figure seemed smaller, thinner under the lights, and part of me prayed he'd just get in his car and drive far away, but another part whispered that I'd already seen the last of him. I didn't sleep that day. I just sat at my kitchen table with one of the old notebooks Alvarez had given me, flipping through pages written in messy, desperate scrawls, words pressed so hard into the paper they bled through. One entry caught my eye. Rule 5, never let anyone you don't recognize speak first. Their words aren't for you. They're for what's listening. And under that, the writer had drawn a rough sketch of a figure in a vest. No name tag, no eyes, just a mouth too wide, and below that, written over and over, "Don't answer, don't answer, don't answer." My stomach twisted as I realized Alvarez hadn't been exaggerating. That thing in the aisle wasn't new. It had been here before, many times. When I came back the next night, Alvarez was already on edge, pacing by the registers, muttering about the cameras going fuzzy, the monitors in the office showing static at random intervals, and he shoved a walkie into my hand, his voice sharp. "If we get separated, you keep this on. Channel 3 only, nothing else. And if you hear my voice telling you to break a rule, you don't listen. Do you understand?" I nodded, too stunned to argue, but the weight of his words pressed on me all night. Around 2, the store grew restless again, the hum of the refrigerators louder, the AC cutting in and out, and that was when the radios crackled, not with static but with a voice. Alvarez's voice, only wrong, too slow, like someone dragging tape saying, "Daniel, aisle 9 now. Leave it empty." And my blood ran cold because Alvarez was standing right next to me, staring at the radio with the same horror I felt. He ripped it out of my hand, snapping it in two, and hissed, "That wasn't me. Never listen when it tells you to break the rules." We spent the rest of the night dodging shadows that didn't belong, the shelves in aisle 9 filling and emptying as if unseen hands were toying with us. And at one point I swear I saw Tony in the reflection of the freezer door, his face pale, eyes wide, mouthing something I couldn't hear before vanishing again. Alvarez dragged me away before I could touch the glass, his tone urgent. "They'll use whatever face you trust. Don't fall for it." And that was the first time I realized these rules weren't just about survival. They were about not being tricked into letting whatever this was out into our world. And I couldn't shake the feeling that every night, every rule, was less about keeping us safe and more about keeping the walls of this place intact. By dawn, when the first sliver of light hit the parking lot, Alvarez finally slumped into a chair near the registers, his eyes bloodshot, his hand trembling, and he whispered more to himself than to me. "It's getting worse, rookie. The rules don't hold as tight as they used to. The first thing Alvarez told me when we walked back into the store that night was, keep your mouth shut no matter who talks to you. And though he'd said similar things before, his voice had a crack in it this time, like he already knew someone was going to test me, and the way his eyes darted toward the glass doors at the front made my stomach tighten, because I realized he was waiting for something or someone to show up. The parking lot outside was empty, except for a single car parked too far away from the lights, a shape barely visible. But when the automatic doors slid open on their own, Alvarez tensed and raised a finger to his lips. A man stepped in, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, his boots clicking too loud on the tile, and at first glance he could have been anyone, just a customer walking in late, but then I noticed he wasn't breathing. No rise or fall of his chest, no mist in the cool air when he exhaled, because he didn't exhale at all. He smiled when he saw me, wide and friendly, and said, "Evening, Daniel. Mind giving me a hand with something in the back?" My throat went dry, my body screaming to answer out of reflex, but Alvarez's hand clamped down on my shoulder, squeezing hard enough to hurt, and he whispered, "Rule 5, rookie. Don't let them talk. Don't respond. Don't let it in." My name in that man's mouth sounded wrong, stretched like he wasn't used to speaking human words, and I realized if I opened my mouth even once, it would be over. I stood frozen, staring at him, and his smile twitched, faltered, then widened again as though pulled by invisible hooks. He repeated himself slower this time. "Evening, Daniel. Mind giving me a hand?" I clamped my jaw shut, biting down until my teeth ached. But Alvarez shoved me backward, hissing, "Go, stock aisle 3 now." And when I hesitated, he nearly shouted, "Move!" So I bolted, ducking behind shelves, listening to the heavy boots follow for a few steps before stopping. I didn't dare look back until I heard the sound of glass breaking near the front. A sharp crash, and when I peeked down the aisle, the man was gone. Only shards of safety glass scattered across the floor. Though the doors hadn't shattered, only the reflection in them. Alvarez joined me a minute later, sweat on his forehead, muttering, "They're pushing harder, using names now. They're not supposed to know our names." We spent the rest of the night in a haze of dread, but what ate at me most wasn't the rules or the shadows. It was the way Alvarez looked at me after, as if checking to make sure I was still myself. He never said it, but I could feel it, his suspicion. It lingered until the shift ended, until the sun painted the parking lot orange, and when he finally muttered, "Get some rest," there was no warmth in his tone. The next day I tried to sleep but couldn't, replaying that voice in my head, the way it sounded almost right, almost human, and I began to wonder if breaking the rules wasn't the worst danger, but following them blindly without ever asking why. So I did something Alvarez would have hated. I drove out to Tony's apartment just to see if he'd made it. His car was in the lot, but the windows of his unit were covered with blankets from the inside, and when I knocked I heard shuffling, then silence. A moment later, a voice whispered my name from the other side of the door. Too flat, too deliberate, and my blood froze as I realized Tony hadn't made it out after all. Or worse, something had followed him home. I ran before the door could open, vowing never to come back, but the sound of that whisper clung to me all day. Back at Walmart, Alvarez noticed the shake in my hands and demanded, "Where were you today?" I lied, said I'd stayed home, but the way he stared at me told me he didn't believe it. That night was worse. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the radios crackled again, a voice whispering my name over and over, faster and faster until it blurred together, and Alvarez ripped the batteries out, tossing the radio across the aisle. Snarling, "They've locked onto you, rookie." "You shouldn't have answered." My chest went cold. "I didn't," I said, but even I wasn't sure anymore. He grabbed me by the collar, pulling me close, eyes bloodshot, whispering, "If you did, you'd better pray it hasn't settled in you yet, because once it does, you'll stop being Daniel." The rest of that shift was a nightmare of second-guessing. Every creak, every flicker of the lights made me jump. I thought I saw Tony again, reflected in the freezer glass, but this time his lips moved faster, repeating something I couldn't make out. And when I pressed closer, Alvarez yanked me away so hard I nearly fell. Shouting, "Don't listen!" He dragged me back toward the break room, slammed the door shut, and for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. He pulled out another journal, shoved it into my hands, and said, "Read this and don't stop, no matter what you hear." Inside were pages written by a woman named Claire, apparently a worker from years ago, and her words were frantic, like someone trying to explain the rules while running out of time. They know your name when you hear yourself say it back. Don't let them repeat it. Don't let them call you. If they call you 3 times, you belong to them. My hands shook as I read, because I realized they'd already called me twice. By dawn, the journal lay open on the table. Alvarez slumped in a chair, muttering that we'd barely held the line, and I sat there numb, replaying the sound of my name on that stranger's lips, and I couldn't stop thinking about the way Alvarez looked at me every time I flinched, like he was already planning what he'd do if I slipped. That was when it hit me. The rules weren't just for survival. They were for containment. And if I had already broken one without realizing it, then maybe I wasn't just in danger. Maybe I was the danger. The shift began with a silence heavier than usual. Alvarez waiting by the doors like a soldier at a checkpoint. His arms crossed, his eyes locked on me the moment I walked in. And there was no rookie this time. No sarcastic greeting. Just that long stare that made my skin crawl. Because I knew he was measuring me, deciding if I was still me. And when I finally muttered, "What?" his reply was low and sharp, "Say your name." And the way he demanded it made my mouth go dry, because I remembered Claire's journal and the warning about names. So I shook my head, but that only made him step closer, his breath hot and bitter with coffee, whispering, "If you can't say it, maybe it's already got you." And for a terrifying second I thought he might pull the box cutter from his belt right then, but instead he shoved a battered notebook into my chest, muttering, "Read Rule 6 again." The page was written in frantic scrawl. "Never trust the voice that asks for your name. If you answer, you give it away. If someone else asks, test them before they test you." I swallowed hard, whispering, "So how do I test you then?" And his lips twitched into something not quite a smile, not quite anger, as he said, "That's the point, rookie, you never know. That's why we watch each other." The rest of the night turned into a mind game. Alvarez kept throwing me questions out of nowhere. What aisle did we stock yesterday? What color was Tony's vest? Who did you see in the freezer reflection? And every time I hesitated, he marked it down in a little notepad he carried, his pencil scratching like a judge tallying evidence. And I wanted to scream at him, to tell him I was still me. But even I wasn't sure anymore. Because that voice calling my name kept replaying in my skull, and sometimes, just sometimes, I swore I could hear it faintly when the PA system buzzed. Around 2 a.m., the lights in aisle 10 went out completely, plunging the shelves into shadow, and Alvarez shoved me toward them, his voice cold. "If you're still human, you'll handle it." I wanted to refuse, wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes told me this was the test, and failing it would mean worse than whatever waited in the dark. So I walked, every step echoing too loud, my flashlight beam trembling over empty shelves, until I saw something at the far end, a figure in a vest, head down, shoulders hunched. "Alvarez?" I called before I could stop myself, my voice shaking, and the figure raised its head slowly, too slowly, revealing my own face staring back, eyes wide and lips moving, whispering my name. I froze, the journal's words screaming in my head. Don't let them say it 3 times, don't answer, but my throat betrayed me, a croak of sound almost spilling out before a hand yanked me backward. Alvarez dragging me into the light, his box cutter drawn. "You almost gave it away," he hissed, shoving me against the shelves, his blade an inch from my throat. "One more slip and I don't care what you look like. I'll cut you down myself." My chest heaved, panic burning, but I managed to choke out, "It looked like me, it was me." And Alvarez's eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe pity, before he shoved the blade back into his belt and muttered, "That's how they win, rookie. They wear us down until we don't know who's who. Then they slip through." The rest of the shift was worse. Every reflection showed movement, every shadow seemed wrong, and Alvarez never let me out of his sight, circling me like a wolf waiting for a mistake. At one point I ducked into the break room to catch my breath, but when I looked up, the security monitor showed Alvarez already inside with me, sitting at the table, though the real Alvarez was in the hall outside, pounding on the door. My pulse spiked as the version on the screen slowly turned his head, smiling too wide, whispering, "Daniel," though the speakers were off. And I bolted, knocking over a chair, yanking open the door to find Alvarez snarling, "What the hell did you see?" When I told him, he didn't argue. Didn't even look surprised, he just muttered, "They're getting bold." By dawn, my nerves were shredded, my throat raw from holding back words, and Alvarez finally let me leave. But his parting words stuck like knives. "If you slip, rookie, I'll know and I won't hesitate." Driving home, I couldn't stop shaking, replaying that aisle 10 doppelganger, its lips shaping my name, and the look in Alvarez's eyes when he pressed the blade to my throat. He didn't just suspect me. He was preparing to kill me if it meant keeping whatever this was from breaking free. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure he was wrong. The night began with Alvarez tossing me a flashlight that barely worked, the beam sputtering with every shake, and his tone sharp. "Stay sharp, rookie. Tonight feels wrong." And though every night had felt wrong since I started, there was a weight in his words this time, like he'd already resigned himself to something, and it made my skin crawl before we'd even clocked in. We started our rounds in silence. The hum of the refrigerator's too loud, the aisle stretching too far like the store had swallowed new space, and I kept glancing at Alvarez, watching the way his hand never strayed from the box cutter clipped to his belt. And I realized he wasn't just watching for shadows anymore, he was watching me. At 1:46, the first scream echoed sharp and sudden from somewhere near the garden center, and I froze. But Alvarez's eyes lit with something wild, muttering, "They're not supposed to scream," and he bolted down the aisle, motioning for me to follow. We reached the garden section to find the glass doors open, warm desert air spilling inside. And standing among the plastic lawn chairs was Tony, or what looked like Tony, his face pale, eyes blank, mouth open as he let out another scream that wasn't human but mechanical, like feedback through a microphone. Alvarez drew his box cutter, snarling. "That's not him," and charged, but the figure only raised its head, lips curling into a grin, whispering, "Daniel!" before lunging, too fast, too sharp. And Alvarez slammed into it, both of them crashing into the shelves, potting soil spilling everywhere. I wanted to run, but my feet betrayed me, and I found myself grabbing a steel broom handle, rushing forward as Alvarez grappled with the thing that wore Tony's face. Its skin tearing under the blade, but no blood spilling, just dark tar-like fluid that hissed when it hit the floor. Alvarez shouted, "Now!" and I swung the broom as hard as I could, cracking the figure across the skull, its head twisting too far, snapping with a sound that made my stomach lurch. It collapsed for a moment, twitching, but then its body convulsed, jerking like a puppet on tangled strings, and another voice spilled out of its mouth. A woman's voice this time, soft and mocking. "You don't trust him, do you, Daniel?" My chest tightened because it was Claire's voice, the name from the journals, the worker who'd written about the rules years ago. And for a split second I hesitated, wondering if it really was her, if somehow she'd been trapped in this thing. But Alvarez didn't pause, driving the box cutter down again and again until the figure dissolved into a puddle of tar that sizzled against the tile, the smell burning my nose. Silence fell heavy until Alvarez turned on me, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his forehead, his blade still dripping with the black sludge, and his eyes locked on mine with pure suspicion. "It used her voice for you," he said slowly, almost whispering. "Why you?" I stammered that I didn't know, but the way his grip tightened on the handle told me he wasn't convinced. We dragged ourselves back to the registers, but Alvarez kept his distance now, pacing like a caged animal, muttering under his breath, "It's one of us. It has to be." At 3 a.m., the PA system crackled, static spilling overhead, and then my voice rang out, calm and steady. "Alvarez, he's not real. You know he's not real." And my stomach dropped because I hadn't spoken. My lips were sealed, but the voice kept going, repeating, twisting into laughter. Alvarez froze, eyes wide, then snapped his head toward me, rage and fear mixing. And in that moment I realized the store wasn't testing me anymore. It was testing him. He lunged, slamming me into the counter, his blade pressed against my throat and his voice cracked. "Tell me why it used your voice. Tell me why it knows your name." My hands shook, my heart racing, and I shoved him back, knocking the box cutter away, both of us scrambling across the tile like wild animals. He swung first, catching my jaw with his fist, and I swung back with the steel broom still in my hands, the sound of the impact echoing down the empty aisles. We fought like men possessed, crashing into shelves, knocking down towers of cereal boxes, each of us convinced the other was already gone. Alvarez's eyes were wild, his breath ragged, but when I pinned him against the freezer door for a split second, I saw real fear. Not of me, but of himself. "What if it's me?" he gasped, and the words hit harder than his fists, because I realized he wasn't sure anymore, that the rules had twisted him so badly he couldn't trust his own reflection. The freezer glass behind him shimmered, a shadow pressing against the other side, and before I could react, it burst forward. a figure like black smoke with no face, wrapping its arms around Alvarez's shoulders. He screamed, thrashing, and for the first time I saw him lose control, sheer terror overtaking him. Without thinking, I drove the broom handle through the shadow's chest, the metal hissing as it cut through the smoke, and the thing shrieked in a dozen voices before vanishing, leaving Alvarez collapsed, gasping on the floor. He stared up at me, eyes wide, lips trembling, and whispered, "You saved me, or maybe you didn't." When dawn finally crept into the store, we were both broken, battered, sitting among the wreckage of overturned shelves and spilled food. Alvarez didn't speak again, just kept staring at me, and I couldn't shake the thought that tonight hadn't been about surviving the rules at all. It had been about turning us against each other. And if that was the real game, maybe we'd already lost. By the time the sun clawed its way over the Arizona desert horizon, the store looked like a war zone. Cereal crunching underfoot, freezer doors hanging open, aisles half collapsed from where Alvarez and I had thrown each other into them. Neither of us spoke on the drive out, both of us too broken, too suspicious, too lost in our own heads. I tried to sleep when I got home, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard the echo of Claire's voice from that thing in the garden center, whispering my name like it belonged to her. I lasted an hour tossing in bed before I gave up and opened one of the old journals Alvarez had forced on me. The entries were smeared, written in pencil that had smudged under sweaty hands, but buried near the back I found something I hadn't seen before. Pages folded and taped together, as if someone had tried to hide them even from themselves. I tore them open carefully, my hands shaking, and read words that weren't numbered like the other rules. It started, "The last rule isn't a rule, it's a truth. Whoever survives the longest becomes the anchor. The rules are not to protect us, they're to keep what's here from breaking loose. When one of us dies, the weight shifts. When the last of us dies, the store will open, and it won't be Walmart anymore." My chest tightened as I realized Alvarez must already know this. Maybe he'd known all along. Maybe that's why he'd been so ready to kill me if I slipped. Because in his mind, if I was compromised, the balance would break. When I showed up for the next shift, Alvarez was waiting in the break room, his hands bandaged, his eyes hollow. And the first thing he said was, "You found it, didn't you?" I froze, the journal heavy in my bag, but he didn't need me to answer. He just nodded like he'd expected it. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling through the fluorescent light, and muttered, "Every rookie does eventually. That's why they never last. Knowing the truth eats you faster than anything else." I asked him why he'd never told me, why he'd let me stumble into it, and his laugh was raw, broken. Because once you know, you start thinking about who's gonna die first, and that thought rots you from the inside. We were interrupted by the radios crackling again, static so loud it made me wince, and then a chorus of voices spilled through. Dozens of names whispered all at once, names I didn't recognize, but Alvarez did, his face going pale as he muttered them under his breath. Claire, John, Marcus, Harris, workers from years past, maybe decades, and every time a name whispered, I swore I felt the air shift. Colder, heavier, like ghosts pressing against the walls. Alvarez slammed his fist into the radio, silencing it, then leaned across the table, his voice low and urgent. "Don't listen when they list names. Every time they speak one, they try to pull that anchor loose. If yours ever comes up 3 times, it's over." The rest of that night blurred together. Hours of walking aisles that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Shadows that bent the wrong way, and reflections in freezer glass showing empty rows even as my flashlight lit shelves full of food. At one point, Alvarez stopped me near the pet food aisle, his expression grim, and said, "They want us tired, paranoid. Don't let it break you." But it already was breaking me. I couldn't stop thinking about that last rule, the unwritten one, and the fact that if it was true, then Alvarez wasn't just my partner. He was my competition. One of us would outlast the other. One of us would be the final lock holding this place shut. At 3:12 a.m. I saw Tony again, standing in aisle 6, his vest pristine, his smile wrong. I didn't move, didn't breathe, but this time Alvarez didn't attack him. He just watched, his knife ready, waiting. Tony spoke in that same stretched, too human way. "You don't trust him, do you, Daniel? He's thinking the same about you. He's wondering if killing you tonight makes the rules easier." My stomach lurched because I had been thinking it, at least in flashes, and the look Alvarez gave me told me he had too. We didn't speak after Tony vanished, just patrolled in silence, both of us waiting for the other to slip. By dawn, I was fraying at the edges. Every sound too loud, every reflection a trap, and Alvarez finally broke the silence as we sat at the registers waiting for the sun. "Rookie," he said, voice low. "There's something worse than dying in here. Worse than turning. It's living too long." He didn't explain, just stared at me like he was daring me to ask, and I didn't because I already knew what he meant. He'd been here too long. He was the anchor now, and maybe that was why he looked so hollow, so eaten alive. Driving home, the desert felt emptier than ever, the sky too wide, and I couldn't shake the thought that I'd already lost, that my name was next on that list, that Alvarez wasn't going to let me last long enough to replace him. And the worst part? A small voice in the back of my head whispered that maybe I should want that. Maybe I should fight for it, because if I became the anchor, I could at least control the rules. But another voice, quieter, colder, whispered something else. If the rules are weakening like Alvarez says, then maybe being the anchor isn't enough anymore. Maybe the store is already opening, and once it does, it won't matter who outlasts who. The truck arrived just after midnight, its headlights slicing through the desert fog, and Alvarez tensed the moment he heard the rumble of the engine, because we hadn't been scheduled for a delivery that night. He muttered, "Don't open it." But the store doors slid apart on their own, and the truck rolled into the loading bay like it belonged there. The driver never got out, never turned his head, just sat behind the wheel with his face lost in shadow, and the back door of the trailer unlatched by itself. The heavy metal rolling upward with a groan that echoed through the empty store. I should have listened to Alvarez, should have stayed away, but something pulled me forward. Something heavier than curiosity. Something like compulsion. Inside the trailer, stacked among boxes that didn't have labels, didn't even look like cardboard, but something darker, wetter. I saw a shape curled in the corner. A man, his vest wrinkled, his head bowed. My breath caught because it was Tony. I froze at the edge of the bay, staring into the trailer, and my throat clenched as he lifted his head, eyes wide and bloodshot, lips trembling as he whispered, "Daniel, help me, please." Alvarez's hand clamped on my arm like iron, yanking me back, his voice sharp. "That's not him. Don't you dare answer." But I could hear the panic in Tony's voice, the weakness, the human crack in it, and I pulled against Alvarez, shouting, "He's alive!" The figure in the corner reached out a shaking hand. His nails chipped, skin raw, and he rasped, "They kept me here in the dark. They wouldn't let me out. You have to believe me." And my chest heaved because it sounded too real. Too much like the Tony I remembered. Alvarez shoved me hard against the wall, his eyes wild, his blade drawn. "That's how they get you, rookie. They make you see what you need to see. You let that thing out, we're both dead." But as Tony's body shook, his voice breaking into sobs, I felt bile rise in my throat. "What if you're wrong?" I spat. Alvarez's jaw clenched, and he pressed the box cutter to my chest, whispering, "Then it's better he rots in there than we let something worse walk free." My heart thundered. Torn between the rules I didn't understand and the friend I'd seen ripped away, I took a step closer to the trailer, ignoring Alvarez's blade, and Tony's eyes locked onto mine with desperate clarity. "Daniel, they'll replace me if you don't. They'll use me against you. I can feel it." The words hit me like a punch because hadn't I already seen him in the freezers, in the glass, in the aisles? What if this was the real Tony, trapped while I'd been fighting only reflections? My mind spun, and Alvarez must have seen the doubt because he roared, shoving me back again. "Don't think, rookie, that's what it wants." Suddenly, the driver's door creaked open, and the man behind the wheel stepped down, his boots heavy, his face still hidden, but his voice carried flat and toneless. One cargo must always remain. My skin went ice cold as Alvarez paled, muttering, "No, not that rule, not here." I demanded he explain, but he shook his head, backing away, his grip on the cutter trembling for the first time. "It's not written down," he whispered, "because if you know it, you start to wonder who the cargo is supposed to be." Inside the trailer, Tony sobbed harder, crawling toward the open door, his fingers clawing at the metal lip, and I reached out despite everything, despite the rules, despite Alvarez screaming, "Don't!" My hand almost touched his when the air split with a shriek like tearing metal, and every box inside the trailer shuddered. The labels bled away, words appearing on the cardboard that hadn't been there before. Names. Dozens. Maybe hundreds of names scrawled in dripping black ink, and one of them burned my eyes so hot I almost collapsed. Mine. Daniel. Alvarez saw it too and cursed, grabbing my wrist, yanking me back as he shouted, "You're in there already, rookie, don't you get it?" That's how it starts, but Tony's voice cracked again, weak, pleading, "Don't leave me, please." and I saw his eyes glisten, saw the brokenness in him, the part of me that still wanted to believe he'd been human once. I pulled against Alvarez one last time, but he slammed me into the wall, his blade at my throat, screaming, "If you free him, we're finished. You think it's your friend, but what if it's you in there, rookie? What if you're already out here empty?" The words hollowed me, because what if he was right? What if I was already the copy? The thing that had walked out when Tony stayed trapped. My knees buckled under the weight of it, and I sank to the floor, my head spinning, my chest heaving as Tony's sobs echoed through the bay. The driver climbed back into the cab, the door slamming shut, and the trailer's door began to roll down again, slow, deliberate, as Tony's hand reached out one last time. Alvarez dragged me away, forcing me through the aisles until the sound of metal locking sealed behind us. I didn't speak the rest of that night. Couldn't. The images tangled in my brain, the names on the boxes, mine among them. Tony's voice begging, the driver's flat decree, one cargo must always remain. By dawn, I realized Alvarez hadn't been fighting to save me or even himself. He'd been fighting to make sure I wasn't the one left inside, and now I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I already was. The sun should have come up by then, but the sky outside stayed bruised. Like a storm pressed against the glass, and every clock in the store flickered midnight, even though I swore I'd seen hours pass since the truck pulled away. Alvarez sat across from me in the break room, the box cutter still clenched in his hand, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed not on me but on the empty doorway, as if Tony might still crawl through at any moment. I wanted to break the silence but couldn't trust my own voice. It felt cracked, borrowed. Finally, Alvarez said, low and hoarse, "You know why you're still breathing, rookie? Because I kept you from making the wrong choice. Don't thank me. Just remember it." I slammed my fist on the table before I could stop myself, the sound too loud in the quiet, and snapped, "How do you know it was the wrong choice? What if that really was him? What if we left a man to die in there?" Alvarez's jaw twitched, his voice bitter. "Because I've seen what happens when you free them. They don't come back human. They come back hungry, and you wouldn't be sitting here if you'd touched his hand." I wanted to believe him, but the memory of Tony's voice gnawed at me. The way he said my name like it mattered, like he knew me. My stomach twisted. I whispered, "You don't get it. I saw my name on those boxes. It was written there. You said if I knew too much it would start to unravel. But what if it means I was already cargo? What if I'm not supposed to be out here at all?" Alvarez leaned forward so suddenly I flinched, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with rage and fear. "Then listen to me, Daniel. If you start doubting yourself, you'll slip. That's how they win. You don't question the rules. You follow them or you end up in the box for real." His eyes bored into me, and for the first time I wondered if he believed what he was saying, or if he was just clinging to something that gave him an illusion of control. The loudspeaker above us crackled, though we hadn't heard it in weeks, and a voice like static whispered, "Choose." My blood froze. Alvarez cursed, bolting to his feet, pacing. "No, not now, not this way," he muttered. I asked him what it meant, and he slammed his hand against the wall, shouting, "It means they're forcing the decision. They don't want two guards. They want one. You're either with me, or you're with it." The store groaned, lights flickering, and from the far aisle I heard footsteps, uneven, dragging, and then Tony's voice again, softer this time, almost gentle. "Daniel, please. You know it's me. You know he's lying." Alvarez raised his blade, his body tense, shouting into the shadows, "Stay back!" But the figure that emerged wasn't the broken man from the trailer. This Tony looked whole, his vest clean, his eyes steady, and that scared me more. He smiled at me, tired but warm, and said, "You remember the night shift pizza runs? You remember me covering for you when you screwed the register count? Does that sound like something a monster would know?" My chest constricted. Those were things only Tony would know. Alvarez hissed, "It's a trick, rookie. They pull memories out of your head. They'll use anything." But his voice wavered, and I could see a crack in his certainty. Tony stepped closer, his hands raised in surrender. "Look at him," he said, nodding toward Alvarez. "He's falling apart, paranoid. He'd kill me just to prove he's right. Is that who you want to follow?" Alvarez snapped, lunging forward, but I shoved him back, my instincts firing. And suddenly it was me between them, my arms outstretched. My mind screamed both answers at once. "He's your friend, no he's bait. Trust Alvarez, no he's broken." The loudspeaker hissed again. "One must remain." I turned to Alvarez, my throat dry. "What does that mean? One of us, him or me?" Alvarez's face was pale as ash. "It means you have to put him down, rookie, or I'll put you down instead." He raised the cutter, his hand shaking. Tony's eyes met mine, wet with tears, and he whispered, "Don't let him decide for you. Don't let fear be the rule you follow." My grip tightened on the metal flashlight I'd been carrying since the freezer incident, its weight heavy, my heart slamming so hard I could barely think. I had seconds. In those seconds, the aisles warped, shadows stretching, the overhead lights buzzing in a rhythm like a heartbeat, and I realized the store itself was watching, waiting. I could almost feel it lean in, hungry for my choice. I swung the flashlight, catching Alvarez off guard, the metal cracking against his wrist, the box cutter clattering to the floor. He roared, clutching his hand, but before I could breathe, Tony lunged forward, grabbing me in a desperate hug. For an instant it felt real. His warmth, his heartbeat, and relief flooded me. Then I saw Alvarez's face twist in horror, and he shouted, "It's not him!" Pain lanced my ribs as something sharp pressed from Tony's chest into mine. Not a blade, but something jagged, bone-like. I stumbled back, staring at him, and his smile flickered, twisting too wide, his eyes too dark. My stomach dropped. Alvarez was already on him, slashing with his free hand, screaming, "I told you!" They collapsed into a struggle, shadows swallowing them both, and I stood frozen, realizing the truth was worse than either of us had believed. Tony was both. The rules weren't about choosing the right person. They were about forcing me to act, to commit, to bloody my hands so I'd never walk away clean. I grabbed the box cutter from the floor, my hand shaking, and without thinking I plunged it into the writhing mass where Alvarez and Tony tangled. A scream ripped through the air. Maybe his, maybe mine, maybe something else entirely, and the loudspeaker hissed once more. "Cargo confirmed." The lights steadied. The air stilled, and when I looked down, only one body lay there. Twisted, unrecognizable, face blurred like melted wax. My breath came in ragged sobs as I dropped the blade, realizing I didn't know who I'd killed, or if I'd just done exactly what the store wanted. And somewhere, in the distance, another truck horn echoed. The break room smelled like copper and bleach, though no one had cleaned, and the body on the floor was still there, or maybe it wasn't. Every time I blinked, it shifted. Sometimes Alvarez, sometimes Tony. Sometimes a faceless lump that looked like it had been dragged through a furnace. I tried to focus, tried to hold on to something solid, but the rules in my head bent and twisted like metal in a fire. Rule 1, never let anyone in after midnight. Rule 2, never talk to anyone who says your name. Rule 3, don't look at the mirrors too long. They all bled together, overlapping, contradicting. The loudspeaker had gone silent, but the silence was worse. I staggered into the aisles, flashlight trembling in my grip. Every product on the shelves turned wrong. Labels in languages I didn't know. Cereal boxes with smiling mascots whose eyes followed me. I told myself out loud, I made the right choice. I did what I had to. My voice echoed back, not quite the same tone. A fraction too slow, like the store was repeating me. The echo whispered, "You don't know who you killed." As I stumbled past the toy aisle, I froze. A display of dolls, all of them dressed in tiny Walmart vests, stared back, their heads turning in unison as I passed. My chest tightened. I tried to ignore it, but one of them, smaller than the rest, had a name tag pinned to its plastic chest. It read Daniel. My breath caught. I ripped the tag off, but beneath it the name was still molded into the plastic, as if it had always been mine. My hands shook so badly I dropped the flashlight, its beam rolling across the floor, catching a shape at the end of the aisle. Alvarez. Or Tony. Or both. He stood there. Or maybe it stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths. I backed away, whispering, "No, you're dead. I saw you die." The figure tilted its head, then spoke in my own voice. "Cargo confirmed." My knees almost buckled. I wanted to run, but my legs carried me toward the garden center, toward the exit I wasn't supposed to use. Rule 5, never open the garden doors after midnight. But what if that was the only way out? I pressed against the glass, peering outside. The sky was wrong. Not night, not day. Just a swirling canvas of deep red and bruised purple. The parking lot stretching farther than it should. Cars parked in perfect rows that repeated like a mirror glitch. I pulled back, heart pounding, but the door handle was warm under my palm, like someone had just let go. I remembered Alvarez's warning, don't question the rules. But what if the rules weren't protecting me? What if they were trapping me? A noise cut through my thoughts. Footsteps again, steady, measured, and then a voice I hadn't heard in weeks, Daniel. It was Harris. He stepped out from behind the registers, pale, trembling, his vest ripped, eyes darting. For a second, relief hit me. Maybe I wasn't alone. But then I saw the tape across his mouth dangling like it had been peeled off and reapplied 100 times, and his hands clutching something, a journal, battered and wet. He held it out to me, muttering, "They want you to read it. They want you to finish what we started." I reached for it, but as soon as my fingers brushed the cover, I felt something slide under my skin, like words crawling into me. The journal snapped shut in my hands, pages whispering on their own. Rule 9. If you kill one, you become the replacement. I dropped it like it burned me, stumbling back, but Harris grabbed my wrist with a grip far too strong for someone shaking that badly. His eyes bored into mine and he whispered, "Look at your reflection." My breath came ragged as I turned to the convex security mirror above the aisle. My stomach flipped. The reflection wasn't me. It was Alvarez. His jaw clenched, his eyes filled with the same fire he'd had when he told me never to doubt. I stepped closer, raising my trembling hand, and the reflection raised its box cutter. I wasn't holding one. My heart hammered as the realization hit me. Maybe I hadn't killed Alvarez at all. Maybe I'd killed myself, or maybe I'd just taken his place like the rule said. The PA system crackled again, static rushing through my ears, and the voice that had whispered before now spoke clearly, coldly. "Daniel is Alvarez. Alvarez is Daniel." "Cargo rotation complete," I screamed, covering my ears, but the voice drilled into my skull. Harris shook his head, tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "It doesn't matter who you are anymore. It matters who they think you are. And right now they think you're the warden." The lights flickered violently, aisles stretching, shrinking, the floor rippling like water. I ran without thinking, clutching the flashlight, past the registers, past the mannequins that now wore faces. My face. Every step echoed louder than it should, like a countdown, until I slammed into the stockroom doors. Behind me, the figure with Alvarez's face, or mine, dragged itself closer, box cutter scraping against the floor, sparks flying. My chest felt like it would explode. The rules didn't make sense anymore. They contradicted, they devoured themselves, and I realized maybe that was the point. Confusion was the cage. If I couldn't tell who I was, I'd never escape. I forced the stockroom door open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut. The air was suffocating, thick with dust and something sweeter, almost rotten. Shelves stretched higher than they should, stacked with boxes labeled in a looping, uneven hand. Every single box said Daniel. I staggered forward, my pulse a war drum, and pried one open. Inside wasn't product. It was a mirror. Dozens of mirrors, shards reflecting me from every angle, each one slightly off. Eyes too wide, smile too sharp, skin too pale. My breath caught. 1,000 versions of me whispered in unison. "Cargo confirmed." I fell to my knees, hands clutching my head, and screamed until my throat tore, but the echoes kept going, louder, drowning me. Somewhere in the cacophony, the loudspeaker hissed again, "Prepare for rotation." The mirrors shivered, then burst outward, glass slicing into my arms and face. But instead of blood, black static poured out, seeping across the floor, crawling up the shelves. I scrambled back, slipping, my heart hammering, realizing the store wasn't a store at all. It was a machine, a processing plant, and I was just another package on the line. The last thing I saw before the lights cut out was Harris standing in the doorway, the journal pressed to his chest, whispering, "You're not the rookie anymore. You're the rule." The stockroom doors rattled behind me as if something enormous pressed against them, but I didn't look back. My legs carried me deeper into the maze of boxes, my flashlight beam flickering over rows that seemed endless. Every label still said Daniel, stamped in shaky handwriting like someone had written it over and over until their fingers bled. My chest heaved, and the rules ran through my mind like broken glass. Never let them in, never answer your name, never open the garden doors, never kill unless you're ready to take their place. I thought I'd been surviving by following them, but maybe the rules were never about survival. Maybe they were about training me, bending me, until I fit the slot they needed filled. The loudspeaker crackled again, and a voice, not Alvarez, not Harris, not mine, spoke with calm finality. "Rotation complete. Cargo reassigned," my vision blurred. The floor felt soft, spongy, as though it wanted to absorb me. I ran, but the aisles curved back into themselves, dragging me in circles. At some point I realized I wasn't running anymore. The floor moved under me like a conveyor belt, carrying me forward whether I wanted it or not. The boxes loomed taller, their sides splitting open, spilling out mannequins in Walmart vests, each one staring with lifeless eyes. Their mouths opened in unison and whispered, "You are the next." I crashed against the far wall, my flashlight clattering away, and for a moment everything went pitch black. Then a dim glow spread across the concrete, and I saw Harris standing there, the journal open in his hands, pages fluttering though there was no wind. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I told you, they don't care who you were. They only care who you are now." He shoved the journal at me. On the page in fresh ink I saw my name scrawled under Rule 9. If you kill one, you become the replacement. Beneath it, a new line appeared as I watched. Rule 10. If you survive long enough, you stop being cargo. You become the warden. The air grew heavy, pressing against my lungs, and when I turned, I wasn't in the stockroom anymore. I was at the front of the store, the automatic doors wide open to a night sky that churned with purple and red clouds. Figures stood outside, rows and rows of them, all wearing vests, all with faces that looked like mine, or Alvarez's, or Tony's. The shapes wavered as if reality couldn't decide which version was true. My legs shook, but I stepped forward past the registers toward the doors. Maybe this was my only way out. As I approached, the figures moved aside, clearing a path, and the loudspeaker above me hissed, "Proceed, Warden." I hesitated, breath sharp in my throat. If I walked through, would I finally be free, or would I be locked in forever? Part of whatever rotation this was. I turned back toward Harris, but he was gone. Only the journal remained on the floor, its pages glowing faintly. I picked it up and the words shifted before my eyes. They weren't rules anymore. They were instructions, a script, and the last line chilled me more than anything. Read this aloud so they know what to do next. I dropped the journal, my hands trembling, but the words were already echoing in my head, spilling from my mouth without my consent. My voice rose, carrying through the empty store, through the loudspeakers, through the static that hummed in the walls. If you're hearing this, you're part of it now. You've been listening. You've been following. That means you've been marked. My pulse thundered in my ears as the mannequins turned their heads toward me, toward the sound. My throat burned, but the words kept coming, dragging themselves out of me. Don't let anyone in after midnight. Don't answer your name when it's called. Don't look too long in the mirrors. Don't open the garden doors. Don't kill unless you're ready to take their place. And if you survive long enough, you'll stop being cargo. You'll become the warden. The lights flickered violently, every bulb popping one by one until only the glow from outside remained. The crowd of figures in the parking lot stepped closer, their faces twisting, merging until I saw not Alvarez, not Tony, not Harris, but reflections of strangers. Reflections of you? My lips cracked into a smile I didn't mean to make as I whispered, "Cargo confirmed." The door slid shut in front of me with a final hiss, locking me inside. I turned, staring straight into the convex security mirror above the register. The reflection didn't wait this time. It leaned forward, grinning, and mouthed the words faster than I could. "You're next." The loudspeaker clicked off, leaving only silence. But I swear, if you're still listening now, if you've made it this far, you'll hear it too. The knock. 3 sharp raps right behind you. Don't turn around. Don't answer. Because if you do, you'll be the one on rotation.